Everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Alexandra Atalla, and I am here representing the Green Commodities community team. We're part of UNDP's Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems practice. And today's workshop is called From Multi-Stakeholder Engagement to Policy Reform, how the example of Indonesian palm oil can be applied in other commodities and landscapes. If you haven't introduced yourself, please feel free to write in the chat box your name, organization, and where are you joining us from. I also wanted to mention a couple of things before sharing with you the agenda of the session. So this workshop will be recorded, and we'll be sending out the recording with the handout to all members after the workshop. In addition, we are providing interpretation from English to Bahasa, and the instructions will be posted in the chat box, how you can access the interpretation function. So I will share briefly today's agenda. So the Good Growth Partnership in Indonesia has been focusing on accelerating the transition to sustainable palm oil. And among other things, it has been supporting the development of policies fostering sustainable production and land use planning. So in this session, we will have two main parts. The first part will be a presentation led by my colleague Aline da Silva, who's a program analyst from UNDP's FACS practice. Aline will share briefly the policy development process, including the overview of the 13 policies, also the key results that have been achieved in Indonesia. Afterwards, we will move to the interview part, which will be led by Pascal Bonzon, Global Project Manager from UNDP's FACS practice. This interview will be led with experts and practitioners from Indonesia. Pascal will introduce them to us in a minute when we get to this part. And colleagues from Indonesia will share their experience of supporting the development of the policies, and also we'll be discussing the learnings from the policy reform work. During this part, this will be also an opportunity for the audience to ask any questions, but also to share your insights and experiences regarding policy reform, and also how the learnings that have been shared throughout this session, how do you see them being applied in other commodities? As I can see also, we have in the audience practitioners who are not necessarily only working on palm oil, but also on other commodities. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand over to Aline for the presentation part.
Thank you, Alexandra, and hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. So as introduced by Alexandra, I work with the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems team at UNDP, and I've been coordinating the work of the Good Growth Partnership over the past 4 years. So this is some lessons from this program that we are going to share with you now. So the Good Growth Partnership has been implemented in 4 countries, but here we are going to focus on the experience of Indonesia working on supporting sustainable palm oil supply chains, and particularly looking at reducing deforestation. We would like to first hear some of your thoughts on a question. My colleague Federica is going to share a Mentimeter link in the chat box, so I will invite you to click on it. And we would like to hear from you, why do you think this is important to work on policy reform for achieving sustainable commodity production. So, so you will see it's really easy. You just have to adhere to copy paste www.mentib.com in your browser, and you can use the code 11630074 and share your thoughts on this question. And Federica is sharing her screen, so we will see your answers showing up in the screen in a couple of seconds. Okay, so I see some first answers appearing. So because the policy environment drives the action of territorial stakeholders in a unified and coherent direction, it's also important to work on policy reform because it provides the rule and the enabling environment, because policy reform can lead to better decision-making and systemic change. Policy work is of paramount importance to transform the enabling environment that shapes sustainable and unsustainable production practices. Did I see a really good insights? Okay, let's just read a last point. Raising legal minimum production standards is the most important way to ensure improvement on social and environmental standards across the board, not just through pockets of best practice. And finally, as well as driving action, it also enables people to hold leaders to account. Great. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. I think we'll stop here. And indeed, you all mentioned it. Policy reform is really key because policies are the rules of a system. So changing and enforcing policies can change the way the system works. So policies can really provide incentives or disincentives to influence some behaviors. So I'm now going to briefly present to you some key results and some lessons from the work of the Good Growth Partnership in Indonesia. So this work on policy reform has been led by UNDP Indonesia, the country office, in partnership with the Good Growth partners in some landscapes. So let me just share my screen. Okay. So I will start by briefly presenting the key results, so the policies that have been supported in Indonesia by the Good Growth Partnership. And we can identify two types of policies. The first one being policies enabling sustainable production. So 6 policies have been supported. You can see that they were both at subnational or national level, and they were really aligned with some of the key issues, key gaps identified. So this included strengthening farmers' extension services or encouraging the facilitation of partnerships between the private sector and smallholders. Then the second category of policies, and 7 actually have been supported in terms of policy development. They focus on land use allocation and the protection of high conservation value and high carbon stocks. Similarly, they were at several levels, so national, provincial, and district level, as you can see in this screen. And they mainly focused on legalizing special plans and also ensuring that important conservation area could be identified and then protected. You can even see some key numbers some key results achieved through this policy work. Indeed, they have enabled more than 800,000 hectares of high conservation value or high carbon stocks to be protected, and more than 37 million tons of CO2 direct emissions to be avoided. Now I will quickly walk you through the process that has been used to support policy development and reform in Indonesia. And the first point I would like to highlight is that all this policy work was really closely related to multi-stakeholder action plans that have been developed at the national and at the subnational level. These action plans for sustainable palm oil, they really allow to crystallize the vision of the stakeholders on the sustainability of the sector, to identify what are the key actions to be taken, and in terms of policy, to identify what are these policy gaps. And then the project helped the facilitation of and development of some of these policies. The process, if we look then now at the concrete steps to support policy development up to the enforcement, the process is slightly different between the two categories of policies I mentioned. If we look at the policy enabling sustainable production, the first step was the conduct of a policy study, then followed by the creation of a task force including a diversity of stakeholders, so government, but also private sector, civil society, academia, that have been working together on the development of these policies before moving to the policy legalization step and finally the enforcement. If we look at the policies focusing on land use allocation, here we have two different steps at the beginning with first some work to identify what are these important conservation areas that is then feeding into the development of land use plans, and then we follow the same steps of a multi-stakeholder policy development, policy legalization, and finally policy enforcement. Finally, I will share with you a couple of lessons from this work that mainly focused on policy development, and in some cases also looked at preparing implementation and helping on the monitoring of the implementation of the policy. So what we learned and some of the key steps that really need to happen after the policy development. First, really the need to support government if needed on planning for implementation of the policy, making sure that budget is allocated for implementation, but also for all the coordination that the implementation might require, such as interministerial coordination, making sure there is a mechanism in place. Another key point is on monitoring. Making sure that a system to monitor the implementation of the policy is also established, that it's functional and that it has budget to be operational. And finally, on the enforcement, similarly having a system to reward when there is good implementation of the policy, or to sanction when there is non-compliance. But my colleagues during the interview will further develop on that, and will tell you more. And they have been the one also supporting this work, so they will even have richer insight than what I just presented, I'm sure. So now I will then hand over to my colleague Pascal Bonzon, who is going to facilitate the interview with our two experts on the policy work in Indonesia.
Thank you very much, Aline, and you are right on time, so wonderful. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that not only I'm very pleased to be with you today, but I'm especially pleased because it's an all-women virtual workshop, so we must be proud of that. And I'm going to be introducing you the two experts, which are two distinguished Indonesian young ladies who will be the interviewees for this Q&A session. So while I introduce them, please do write any questions that you have based on Aline's presentation and any questions you may have on the topic, but of course, with reference to Indonesia and the work done there in the chat, and we will use that. We have selected a couple of questions already to start with, but then we will move on to selecting questions that you post in the chat. So let me introduce Pisha and Anselma. Pisha Tias has been working with UNDP since 2016. She supported the preparation phase of the Good Growth Partnership project in Indonesia, known as GGP, and coordinated the implementation of the policy work of that project at both national and landscape levels between 2017 and 2019. Most recently, she conducted an assessment of the implementation of policies facilitated by GGP, and Pisha holds a master's degree in public administration development practice. We also have Anselma Faustina. She has been working in the environmental sector in Indonesia for over 5 years. In the early days of her career, she worked at an international NGO focusing on palm oil and directly supporting the private sector to implement their sustainability commitments. And between 2020 and 2021, while at UNDP, she worked on GGP in policy facilitation, both at national and subnational levels. And currently, she is employed at an international corporation to ensure the implementation of their environmental commitments. So we're going to now start with the first questions that I'm going to ask both Pisha and Anselma. And the first question is basically, just give me a moment as I am scrolling to those questions. The first question is, what are the main challenges you faced, Pisha and Anselma, in your work supporting development of policies for sustainable commodity production? And how did you overcome these challenges? So I don't know, maybe we start with Pisha. Over to you, Pisha.
Sure. Thank you, Pascal. It's been 3 years, so I'm trying my best to remember the experience back then. But I think the first one was the difficulty in legally establish the technical team to design the policy. So we wanted to promote a multi-stakeholders approach in policy development that was not very common in our government system. To design the policy, and it took a while to get the team approved by the head of the decision maker. In this case, let's say if it's a minister regulation, then we needed a decree to establish the team by the minister. But this team was crucial because the steps, and this is the second challenge, the step or points that we had to pass to get the regulation legalized. And each of the step and points kind of signifies decision-making process, meaning that these are the people or authority that we have to pass to get the regulation legalized. And then because of the long time it takes for the regulation to be finalized, a lot of time we had a structural change in the government, and then we had to re-engage again with the decision maker, and this team actually helped a lot to justify why we did the activity, because it was legally established. I think the last one that I could remember was it was difficult to ensure consistency of the policy, because there are so many regulations in Indonesia that regulate the same issue or topic. Let's say land conflict. Ministry of Agriculture has their own approach to resolve the land conflict. The Ministry of Environment and Forestry has their own strategies, and also the Land National Agency has their own regulation. And so it was very difficult to ensure that our policy is not conflicting with the existing policies under different ministries. So that was, I think that was another challenge, biggest challenge that I could remember. I don't know, Mak Selma, feel free to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Pisha. And before maybe passing on to Baselma, it would be great to know how you tackled these challenges or attempted to tackle these challenges.
At least with the reconstruction of the government, because we had the technical team that was legally established that have a lot, they helped us to convince the new elected or the new designated person that we needed this policy. So that was the reason why it actually worked. But in terms of consistency, we did our best to at least ensure the regulation was not conflicting. We couldn't solve all of the issue, like, you know, the ministries have different approach. We couldn't convince the other ministries to change their approach, but at least we could do in the feasibility study was ensuring that our policy does not conflict with the others. That was the approach that we took.
Okay, thank you very much. Over to you, Baselma.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you, Visca. So actually, during my time working at UNDP, I identified two main challenges. Well, the first challenge was actually already explained by Visca very accurately. Of course, the first challenge is about the changing of the stakeholders. I think it is very common at the government agency in any other part of the world that the officers are rotated every 3 to 5 years, depending on the government regulation itself in each country. So when that occurs during the policy facilitation process, then you have to engage the new officer in charge from the beginning. This thing is, you might get lucky if the new officer is actually already involved in the system, but it could also be a totally new person. Then that means that you have to convince him or her again about the policy itself, why it is important. And then you will lose sometimes in that process. But I don't see any other way to overcome that challenge by having an established and intensive facilitation and engagement with the government officials, because you won't know when they're going to be moved or rotated. So that's why you have to engage with all the government officials and the important stakeholders that you deem necessary during the policy facilitation process. And then the second challenges that I experienced was to find the common ground between the policy's objective that we facilitated with the government's interests. I'm not saying that our policy is at the opposite side of the government, but sometimes the government has other agenda that is more priority than the policy that we were facilitating, like what we experienced during the pandemic, because the government cut the budget and they reallocate the budget to overcome these COVID issues, and then the resources, the human resources, are also spent to overcome that issue as well. So what I did back then was, again, I did the intensive engagement with the officials, convincing them like, hey, this policy will serve the best interest of the government, will serve the best interest of the country, if not immediately, if not now, in the future. So you have to convince them like, this is the groundwork that you are doing right now for the future benefit that you may enjoy later on.
Okay, thank you, Selma. So I'm going to move to the second question to both of you. What are the key lessons from your experience in Indonesia on policy reform support that can be applied to other commodities and landscapes elsewhere, also in different countries? What can you share with us on these key lessons? Starting again from Pisha, please.
Just because I recently did that policy implementation assessment, I think the biggest lesson that I learned is that policy legalization alone is not enough. The government still needs support to at least enable them to implement a policy. So setting up the monitoring system, ensuring that there are people in charge to implement the policy and to monitor the policy, and even enforcement mechanism has to take place before the policy can be fully implemented. And unfortunately, in our work, we did not have that time and even financial support to give to the government to enable them to implement the policy, and that was kind of unfortunate. You know, if we knew that it was that important, we could have done more. But it's just unfortunate that our project ends. And I think I think also like supporting the government to at least mainstream that policy into their work plan. And I think this is the key, because a lot of the policies that we facilitated, we did not have time to actually mainstream the policies into the government work plan. And so when I monitored the implementation was not budgeted. The monitoring was not budgeted. And that was because that policy was not mainstream into their work plan, and did not become one of their KPI. So that was I think that was my biggest lesson learned.
Thank you, Pisha. What about you, Selma?
Well, to complement what this judge just explained is, I think for me, the biggest lesson learned is definitely engaging with the national government, because in Indonesia, we're not only working with the national government, but also with the subnational government. And sometimes when the national government is not involved, they would be like, it will be difficult for the subnational government to implement the policy, because again, in Indonesia, specifically in Indonesia, it really depends on the district government or the subnational government, where they get the budget from. Most of the time, the district government in Indonesia, they get the state budget from the national government. So basically the national government is already mandated them to do certain specific activity and to implement certain specific policy as the priority actions for the next 5 years. Because here in Indonesia, we do the implementation plan for the government every 5 years. We update it every 5 years. So if the national government is not involved, we will face the challenge, like Pisha just explained, like the policy is not incorporated into the district or the subnational government implementation plan, and there will be limited funding allocated or not, or else the district government will rely heavily on the donors funding, which we know that the donors is not going to be there forever. So at the end of the day, the ownership should come from the government itself. So I guess for me, it really is important to engage with the national government, so that the subnational government and the national government are aligned, like, hey, this is going to be our priority actions for the next 5 years, and we will allocate a certain funding to ensure that the plan is implemented.
Thank you, Baselma and Pisha. So I retain from what I heard, 2 key lessons. First of all, make sure, and these are very good lessons for any project design happening in relation to policy. So take notes, those countries that are online and starting to design new projects. The first one is, yes, often, we are stopping at legalizing and getting a tick in our log frame and indicators and targets that a policy has been legalized, but unfortunately that's not enough. And we really need to ensure that we also budget in our project support for policy implementation, which includes monitoring and enforcement, and budget around that also ensures that the government sets aside the proper budget, mobilizes it for those activities. And then the second one is engagement of all levels of government, all geographic scales of government, and alignment between them, so national, provincial, and district, so national and subnational, to apply this to other countries. Great, so thank you very much for your answers to these 2 questions and for sharing your insights. I see one question in the chat from Liza, and I'm wondering if more people could contribute questions. We still have about 15 minutes to actually go into more questions and answers. So please go ahead and add your questions to the chat. I see another question now from Charlie. So great. I'm going to start with Liza's question. So to both of you, Pisha and Anselma, would you change anything in the approach you took by hindsight? And if that is the case, what changes would you suggest for achieving better results? Let's start with that question. Pisha?
In some of the, actually in majority of the policies that we supported, we did not include enforcement mechanism, and it made the policy itself weak because there is no enforcement mechanism. So I think one of the approaches I would like to change, perhaps, including enforcement, some types of enforcement mechanism in the policy, whether that administrative or even penalty sanction, but administrative at least, we needed to include that in the enforcement mechanism. And also, like I said before, not only stopping at the legalization stage, but also at least provide them capacity building to enable them coordinate to implement the policy, and also to utilize monitoring tool and providing capacity building for them to enable enforcement. I think that would help them a lot to implement the policy. Yeah, that's from my side.
Thanks, Pisha. What about you, Anselma? Anything to add?
Yeah, actually, it links to my previous answer, Pascal, about the importance of engaging in national policy. And I learned it the hard way during my time in UNDP, because in the beginning, in early 2021, we facilitated the Pelalawan protection and management of peatland. That's in the sub-district in this level. And during that time, we were engaging heavily with the sub-district government. We did involve the Minister of Environment and Forestry, which is at the national level, but we only involved them during the beginning of the process and towards the end of the process when we were about to legalize the regulation, the draft regulation. And because the national government was not involved throughout the process, so it took us almost a year, I believe, to legalize that regulation, to have the draft regulation legalized. So I learned from that experience, and when we decided to facilitate the provincial level regulation, which is the Riau Decree on the protection and management of peatland, before we started the engagement and before we started the facilitation process, we decided like, okay, in this case, we are going to involve the Minister of Environment and Forestry from the beginning and throughout the process. So it's not just, like in the beginning when we wanted to basically inform them, like, hey, we are going to facilitate provincial level or not subnational level for this regulation. And then towards the end when we were about to legalize. So the Minister of Environment and Forestry was involved in all aspects, in all steps. And it took us, I think, less than 3 months to have that regulation, the draft regulation legalized. So I guess it's not that something that I would change, because I did change the approach in the middle when we were about to start the new regulations. But I learned that by involving the national government, that we can achieve a better result. The legalization process becomes more swiftly than, just involve them partially.
Great, thank you, Anselma. So I have another question now from Charlie. How do you think we could be more politically intelligent in how we go about influencing policy creation, i.e. engaging in policy creation as a political process, not just a technical process? Pisha and Selma, any thoughts on this question?
I can go first. Take turns with this,
Please.
I think it's a bit sensitive. This is a really good question, Charlie. Thank you for that. I think engaging in policy creation as a political process is quite sensitive because as an organization, UNDP needs to be neutral, right? And we need to really support the government's interests. Like we need to collaborate with the government in alignment with their interests. And it is quite sensitive for us to interfere with the political process. So I would say that, again, it really depends on the policy that we are going to facilitate the government, in this case, like Indonesia. If we want it to be more of like a political process, not a technical process, we need to make sure that the policy that we are going to facilitate is actually aligned with the national government interests, not only like 1 or 2 years interest, but the long-term interest of the government. And I also understand that the government's interests may change in the future, because that also happened during our facilitation process, and that is okay. There's nothing much we can do when it becomes so political, because again, we're not here to interfere the political process, but we're here to provide the support to the government that serve best the government's interests. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Anselma. Anything to add, Pisha, or should we move to another question?
I had the same answer.
Okay, great. I see a related question. So Lavinia, I will move your question to a little bit later. I see a question from Ronald Cumberbatch, which is related to, how do we make sure we select, we co-select, we co-design, of course, the selection of policies to work on. So his question is, how can we have more certainty on the usefulness and necessity of the policy designed? And how can a co-created stakeholder government-led process be fostered to ensure buy-in and tangible uptake? Maybe you can reflect on your experience on how you did that. And maybe in Indonesia, and maybe especially Pisha, since you were part of the design, in terms of selecting priority policies. Yes, so please go ahead.
Because of the project, right, we, at least for the GEF, they have core indicators, and then we had to make sure that we achieve those key indicators. And so we've selected policy based on our consultation with the country office and also the national stakeholders, what policies that we could facilitate to literally achieve those core indicators, Pascal. This is such a bad thing to say, but that was it in the project, right? And so we selected a number of policies that would contribute to those, and that's how we came up with the 6 policies in Indonesia. And in terms of stakeholders, that technical team that we proposed to the government when we designed the policy, we made sure that we had representative from key stakeholders like company, if the regulation is related to company, or at least the ministries, when the regulation is covering a number of ministries, for example. So we did our best to make sure that it's not only government led policy design, but also making sure that other stakeholders are able to provide their inputs, and the policy was publicly consulted. So that I don't know if I'm answering Ronald's question.
Ronald, are you happy?
Yes, thanks. Sorry, I'm driving. Thanks very much. Thought
Okay.
that was a very nice response. Cheers.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Lavinia, do you want to read your question for a change so that it's not always me? Go on.
Yes, I can read that. So Thank you very much, Anselm and Pisha. My question was about the enabling environment. So what are the enabling conditions to best support facilitation of the development of a policy? And I don't know who wants to start there, Anselma or Pisha, if you have an insight, Pisha, maybe?
The answer would be the same as Anselma, that choose the policy that are nationally prioritized, or at least the policies that presidents are related to president's commitment. So not only that is politically intelligent to obtain the buy-in, but also the budget. Take, for example, one of the policies that we facilitated related to farmers training, strengthening the farmers' institutional capacity, for palm oil. Unfortunately, in Indonesia, the president's priority is food crops. And so even when the policy was legalized, they had no budget to be implemented because the budget goes to food crops, not to plantation commodities. So I think the biggest enabling condition would be to select the policy that are within the priority of the national government, best if it's priority of the president.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with Pisha because that's also what I experienced. And to add on one example, when we facilitated the Minister of Agriculture decree on companies' responsibility and facilitating a community plantation development, well, it was in the interest of the government, in the national government interest. And at that time, it was coincidence that the Indonesian government just legalized the omnibus law, and the omnibus law mandated the Ministry of Agriculture to basically resolve this community plantation development because it has been ongoing for decades, and it is a crucial issue, right? Because the idea of having palm oil plantations is actually to foster the welfare of the local community, so not only for the benefit of the private sectors itself only. So because it was in the best interest of the national government, so we didn't really experience much pushback or setback. Actually, the Ministry of Agriculture was really owning the process, and they did the public consultation when the draft regulation was finalized, and the legalization process was only taking like 2 or 3 months. I couldn't remember exactly, but it was quite quick because there is also already like the legal umbrella at the national level, and then there was already the derivative regulation that supports and mandates the development of this regulation. So yeah, I mean, if there is a key enabling condition, is definitely choosing the regulation that serve the national government's best interest.
Thanks, Anselma, and thanks for the example you provided. It's great to have examples to illustrate. I'm going to take 2 questions together, the one from Jairo and the one from Christina, because they build on each other. So Jairo asked, does the process of policy facilitation involve other sectors? Do you think the private sector could allocate resources for the implementation of policies? And then Christina asked, following on this question, if the work on palm has laid foundations with the government of Indonesia and other stakeholders, can this process more easily be implemented now on other crops? More priority ones for the government, as you say. And she's especially interested in coffee. And of course, coffee is also a crop that under the food land use and restoration impact program will be a key a crop under consideration along with palm oil, cocoa, and rice. So Pisha and Anselma, anything you want to say to these questions?
I could go first, but Selma, do you want to go first?
No, it's okay. You can go first.
No, we did include different sectors in the policy design, including the company. But it's about I would say it's about the enforcement. So even when we included the company, they are not really contributing because no one is enforcing the policy for the the implementation of the policy. So it's totally voluntary. Just like the CSR, for example, the CSR regulation that we facilitated in Pelalawan. In order for the regulation to be implemented, they needed to establish the so-called CSR task force. And until today, that task force has not been established. And that task force was supposed to include the government, private sector, and also the targeted beneficiaries. And that task force is not being established. So yes, in the policy design, we included the stakeholders, the relevant stakeholders that we needed to be included. And what was the second question? That was from Christina, right?
Yes.
Christina, unfortunately not for the crops. Like I said, the national priority right now is food crops, meaning that plantation crops are not part of it. So the priority is right now for rice and all like 90% of the national budget for agriculture goes for rice, or rice field development or rice production. So yeah, so no coffee, no palm oil.
But to that point, just sorry to interrupt, I would say then for rice, all of the, many of the key national stakeholders are now familiar with the terminology, the process, the outcomes of what you've done in palm. So when or if it is appropriate to use the same approach for rice, do you think it'll be easier because of this familiarity now with what you've done? So I know, of course, every sector is different, but I'm just wondering whether it will make it that bit easier because you're not starting from zero. You're starting from a position where these concepts of how we do this work has now been introduced to key stakeholders. So would it be easier for rice, do you think?
Oh yeah, of course, and especially when rice is national priority, even if we did not introduce, even if we did not facilitate the policy, the government would go ahead to, like create a number of policies that would enable rice production. So like I said, and like as long as it's within the government's priority, everything will be easier to be be proceeded for in Indonesia.
Anselma, anything to add from your side, or should we move to another question?
I have the same answer as this, Jessica.
Okay, well, I'm going to take one last question because we have a question from somebody from Indonesia, I believe. So it's great to have a voice from Indonesia in terms of the questions as well. So it's a question from Pak Dedi, I believe. Currently in Indonesia, there are some policy documents produced by MSP, but government has no budget, or the budget is not enough for the socialization or implementation. Do you have any experience in leveraging sustainable or green financing in oil palm or other commodities to solve this issue?
Not from my side.
Selma?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the experience to leverage the sustainable or green financing. So I cannot really answer this question, but I guess, the issue that Pak Dedi was asking is actually very on point. And again, that emphasized the importance of not only thinking about the legalization, but also thinking about the implementation, the monitoring, and that includes the capacity building and ensuring that the funding is available, the budget is available for implementation.
Yeah, I think, we may have people actually in the audience that have experience to share on that. So if anyone does, please do. I know that our biofin team certainly are experts trying to do that, trying to align green finance to policies, especially those that support biodiversity impacts. So if anyone in the audience wants to add and answer this question or contribute to the discussion, I believe we still have 2-3 minutes before we need to close. So go ahead if anyone wants to raise their hand and contribute. Okay, I'm giving it a few more seconds. And if no one raises their hand, I'll pass it back to Alexandra. I see one new message. Let me take a look. Right. Well, I mean, Pisha, yes, that can be debated. I mean, there are some innovative mechanisms in the commodity space. We can talk about TLFF, the Tropical Landscape facility, you know, which is related to rubber for now, but can be applied. And there's more, but I think this was specific to policies. So look, I don't see anyone that wants to contribute to this question or other questions. So I'm going to close it now. And thank you all very much for all these good questions. And of course, I would like to thank especially Anselma and Pisha for their contributions and for being with us late in Indonesia, and for all those participants from all over the world. And I'm going to pass it back to Alex. Thanks. Alex, back to you.
Thank you, Pascal. And indeed, thank you, Anselma and Pisha, for your rich insights. So now we're going to ask a question to our audience. And I'm going to share my screen. And you will find as well the question in the chat box. So please share with us one thing that you would do differently in your project or worked based on what you have learned in this workshop. So it can be anything that comes to your mind. Please do share it with us in the chat box. And maybe while you're thinking of your answer or typing your answer, I would like to invite everyone to check regularly the Green Commodities Community digital platform. So please visit us there. This way you can connect with other practitioners across commodities, geographies, and organization. You can learn about our upcoming events and free courses. You can get access to resources and knowledge products. And you can also organize your own events and create your project groups. In addition, we have a Good Growth Partnership group, dedicated group on the Green Commodities Community platform. So if you have additional insights or questions related to this specific workshop, please do go there and ask them. If you are not yet part of the Green Commodities community and you would like to join us, please just go as well on our website and click Apply to Join. We look forward to welcoming you there. And with this, I would like to thank again our experts from Indonesia, Anselma and Pisha. I would like to thank our presenters, Aline and Pascal, all of you who have participated, and also the organizing team. We will send out the handout from the workshop with the recording in a separate email. And we hope to see you joining us for the future events and, of course, on the digital platform.